There are some crimes Vietnam takes so seriously that if they find you guilty, they will sentence you to death. Crimes such as murder, rape, and drug trafficking. Vietnam has some of the toughest drug laws in the world, but fraud and embezzlement and some white-collar crimes are also punishable by death. And this woman has just been sentenced to death. But what did she do that would make Vietnam hand a woman such a harsh penalty? Let's start her story from the beginning. Truong My Lan was born in October 13, 1956 in Saigon, South Vietnam. She comes from a Sino-Vietnamese family in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon. It has long been the commercial engine of the Vietnamese economy, dating well back to its days as the anti-communist capital of South Vietnam with a large ethnic Chinese community. Truong My Lan was only able to finish high school before joining her mother, selling cosmetics in Ho Chi Minh City's oldest market. However, she began buying land and property after the Communist Party ushered in a period of economic reform known as Doi Moi in 1986. By the 1990s, she owned a large portfolio of hotels and restaurants. Truong My Lan and her family established the Thinh Phat Company in 1992, initially operating in the field of commerce, restaurant, and hotel businesses. Later, the company expanded into VTP Group, operating in the real estate business with many restaurants, hotels, office buildings, and apartment buildings. After many years, Truong My Lan has created an ecosystem of VTP with a series of subsidiaries, typically Thinh Phat Joint Stock Company and Dong Investment Joint Stock Company, Times Square Investment Joint Stock Company, and Group Saigon Peninsula Group. These are a group of companies specializing in real estate investment. Right from the first days of establishment in 2007, these businesses were said to be related to the shareholder group of Saigon Bank and VIPD Group. The common characteristic of this group is that they have super huge registered charter capital, all around 10,000 billion Vietnam dong. VTP has two major projects: Dong Commercial Hotel, Windsor Plaza Hotel, and Sherwood Residence Luxury Apartment Building. In Ho Chi Minh City, Truong My Lan was known as the boss of huge real estate projects located in many of Saigon's most prime locations such as Times Square, VTP Office Building, Duxton Hotel, and Union Square. Besides, Thinh Phat also owns a series of other super projects such as Bonville Land Residential Area, Sterling Residence Luxury Residential Area, Lambert Residence Luxury Apartment Complex, Thuan Q Plaza, Central Nguyen Hue Coffee Restaurant, Huang He Restaurant, and Duc Bao Restaurant are all located in the center of District 1, Ho Chi Minh City. For a long time, Thinh Phat was ranked among the largest and most mysterious family companies in Vietnam. There is very little news about this business leader and almost no media exposure. In 2022, VTP was mentioned a lot in the press for its role related to two companies winning land auctions in Thu Thiem. The most prominent in the VTP ecosystem is the group of financial institutions including SCB Bank, Tan Viet Securities Company, and Vinh Phu Financial Investment Joint Stock Company. SCB Bank is considered the main organization providing capital to businesses in the VTP ecosystem. Over the past decade, VTP has been considered one of the leading corporations in Vietnam in the field of real estate investment and business with financial potential that is said to be very strong and is often present in projects, very large projects and famous acquisition deals. However, behind this empire, there were shady things happening. Please subscribe if you find this video informative, and please hit that notification bell so you will be notified when we drop another video. Thinh Phat Group has built the Thinh Phat ecosystem with more than 1,000 businesses including domestic and foreign subsidiaries and member companies, divided into many classes with hundreds of individuals hired as legal representatives or relatives. Officers and employees of Thinh Phat Group are divided into four main groups with close relationships closely together. These four groups include: the first one is Vietnam Financial Institutions Group. These includes SCB Bank, Tan Viet Securities Company, Vinh Phu Financial Investment Joint Stock Company, in which SCB plays a particularly important role being used as a financial tool to finance businesses. The second one are the group of companies that has business operations in Vietnam, most activities in the field of real estate business, restaurants, hotels, and companies with large charter capital that holds controlling shares in subsidiaries and member companies such as Group Joint Stock Company and Dong Investments. The third one are groups of companies which are called ghost companies in Vietnam. They were established to get legal entities to contribute capital to invest in projects, borrow money from banks, and carry out debt rollovers or sign cooperation contracts in construction. The last one are company network group abroad. Truong My Lan builded a network of many shell companies in tax haven territories and countries to serve investment and business activities abroad or use the name foreign investor to invest in Vietnam. These companies are responsible for managing the capital and assets of Truong My Lan's family abroad. She directed the group of defendants at Thinh Phat Group to establish and receive transfers, and used thousands of legal entities to name the loan, transfer, or receive money from abroad, release stock, name the project, restructuring share ownership between companies, and to transfer shares and assets to individuals according to the purposes of Truong My Lan and her accomplices. Among them, there are a large number of ghost companies established with no business activities, but only to take out loans in their names at SCB Bank and to set up false loan plans and legalize SCB's withdrawals for Truong My Lan. She also directed a group of subjects at Thinh Phat Group to hire and ask thousands of individuals to sign loans at SCB Bank and act as legal representatives of ghost companies and act as collateral assets. Opened accounts to receive money and withdraw cash to serve Truong My Lan's purposes. With the policy of taking advantage of the bank's activities and mobilizing capital to meet the business needs of the group and companies in Thinh Phat's ecosystem, she acquired 3 private banks by buying and owning the majority of shares of these banks to manipulate operations for personal purposes. Vietnamese law prohibits any individual from holding more than 5% of the shares in any bank. However, through hundreds of shell companies and people acting as her proxies, she actually owned more than 90% of Saigon Commercial Bank. She bought the shares of the banks by asking someone to own the shares, but she was running the bank. She held 91.5% of the shares of Saigon Commercial Joint Stock Bank under the names of 8143 shareholders. 32% of the shares of Vietnam Tin Gia Commercial Joint Stock Bank are under the names of 9874 shareholders, and 36% of the shares of First Commercial Joint Stock Bank are under the names of 8046 shareholders. After these 3 banks were merged with the named Saigon Commercial Joint Stock Bank, she continued to ask one shareholder to own small percentage of NGSCB's shares, at the same time continuing to buy and use SCB shares in the individual's name to increase the share ownership ratio in this bank to 91.5%. The financial situation of SCB Bank was very bad. In fact, at that time, SBC Bank had negative equity, but she directed the subjects at SCB to cover it up. Cover up, report dishonestly, and use tricks to bribe inspection officers so that they conceal and report dishonestly about the current situation at SCB Bank. Truong My Lan and her accomplices carried out the act of withdrawing and appropriating money from SCB through loan tricks with the help of subjects at valuation companies. Over a period of 3 years from February 2019, she ordered her driver to withdraw 108 trillion Vietnamese dong in cash from the bank and store it in her basement. To withdraw money from SCB, in addition to using ghost companies, they used collateral assets that did not meet legal conditions, falsely increasing the value many times. In addition to the trick of draining SCB Bank with money, she also directed her accomplices to drain SCB Bank by swapping and withdrawing valuable collateral assets from SCB Bank to use for her own purposes. In order to legally withdraw money for her own purposes, and to avoid detection by the authorities and be able to trace the money flow to detect violations, she directed her subordinates to withdraw on her behalf. Specifically, she directed her accomplices to use fraudulent loan plans that had been created to disperse and transfer money to accounts of ghost individuals and legal entities to transfer money out of the system. Due to all these violations, the principal and interest debt at SCB are increasingly bulging and leading to the need to account for Group 5 bad debts. To hide part of the bad debt and to reduce credit balance and be able to continue lending, they sold bad debt to VAMC and sold on deferred payment to the ghost companies themselves. However, she was caught.
To Vietnam, where a property tycoon has been sentenced to death in the country's biggest ever financial fraud case.
It is extraordinary. The amounts of money are absolutely staggering. We're talking about a significant chunk of Vietnam's GDP that this woman was able to siphon off over 11 years through these secretly channeled loans that went through a whole bunch of front companies and proxies to her own companies.
How do you steal 10% of a country's GDP and nobody noticed?
The Vietnamese government learnt of her shocking levels of fraudulence in early 2023, when President Nguyen Xuan Phuc and two deputy prime ministers were forced to step down for violations and wrongdoings related to pandemic-era corruption scandals. Truong My Lan and her accomplices were caught and charged with illegally controlling the Saigon joint stock commercial bank between 2012 and 2022 to siphon off billions of pounds worth of funds through thousands of ghost companies and by paying bribes to government officials. Vietnamese law prohibits any individual from holding more than 5% of the shares in any bank, but prosecutors reportedly said that through shell companies and people acting as her proxies, she actually owned more than 90% of Saigon Commercial Bank. She was accused of using that power to appoint her own people as managers and ordering them to approve loans which reportedly made up 93% of the bank's total lending to the network of shell companies she controlled. They were accused of allowing 2,500 loans, resulting in losses of $27 billion to the bank. According to prosecutors, over a 3-year spell beginning in February 2019, she ordered her driver to withdraw over $4 billion in cash from the bank to be stored in her basement. She was also accused of bribery, committed to ensure her loans weren't scrutinized. Among those also sentenced was former central bank official Thinh Phat, who got life in prison for accepting $5.2 million in bribes. Truong My Lan was sentenced to death by court in Ho Chi Minh City after being found guilty of embezzlement, bribery, and violations of banking rules. The verdict also requires Lan to compensate the bank $27 billion, which prosecutors said may never be recovered, while some are said to believe the death penalty could be the court's way of pressuring her to help locate the missing money. It is a rare ruling that makes her one of very few women in Vietnam to have been sentenced to death for a white-collar crime. Despite mitigating circumstances, with Lan having participated in charity activities and committing a first-time offense, the court attributed its harsh sentence to the case's seriousness, saying she was at the helm of an orchestrated and sophisticated criminal enterprise that had serious consequences with no possibility of the money being recovered. The court handed her a death sentence, claiming that her actions not only violate the property management rights of individuals, but also pushed SCB into a state of special control and eroding people's trust in the leadership of the Communist Party and state. Truong My Lan case is one of the biggest bank fraud in the world. If you are interested in other financial frauds cases, watch the playlist below.